Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us to this webinar. We're really happy that you could make time for this and that you are actually really ahead of time. And our apologies for starting 10 minutes later. We were giving a few people slightly more time to join us, including some of our panelists. So we are really grateful that you could find time to join us to what we are considering a very important conversation, especially at this particular time when we are experiencing a difficult time as a country, but also really globally, the pandemic that is currently threatening to grind everything to a halt. So I will really just start off the meeting, and we have seen the program as has been shared by my colleague Bernard. I'll start off with a quick opening remarks, and then I will move on to invite the speaker who's coming after myself. I will be co-moderating this session together with my colleague Davis Malombe, who is the Deputy Executive Director at the Kenya Human Rights Commission. My name is Mary Campbell. I work here at the Kenya Human Rights Commission, and I am leading our work on trade and labor and land and resource governance. And I'm really, really honored to be hosting this meeting at the KHRC. Now, we all understand the times that we are finding ourselves in. We are really in a difficult time, and the world has experienced really a numbing experience since the spike of COVID-19, which of course was reported first in China last year, toward the end of last year. Kenya as a country reported its first case in March 2020, and currently we are experiencing a drop in the numbers. But before this drop, as a country, we have also been alarmed by the rising and soaring numbers of COVID cases. And to date, our country remains one of the highest numbers of infections and deaths compared to its neighboring countries. So if you look at the numbers that are reported, say in Uganda, for instance, and other neighboring countries, we remain the country that has the highest number. And the fact that we are a country whose people live in poverty, a majority, huge numbers of our people are living in poverty. We have a weak health infrastructure. We have, of course, informal settlements that are overly populated. And of course, that a huge population still grapples with access to basic services such as access to clean water, sanitation, and basic hygiene. Now, our government, just like many others, has taken measures to curb the spread of this virus, including, and some of these measures include the limitation of movement, especially within counties that have reported very high numbers of COVID-19. There has been, of course, closure of public spaces that have a huge human traffic. That would include schools, hotels, bars and places like those that have a huge number of people frequenting. And of course, we have the introduction of a dawn to dusk curfew. We still have the curfew, of course, with revised hours. So previously, it was a 5 a.m. to 7 p.m., but we have an extension of up to 7 p.m. And many other measures have been instituted to ensure that basic hygiene, including social distancing requirements, can be met during this pandemic. But what these precautionary measures have done is that they have actually really affected the economy negatively. And the most impact is actually felt by businesses and workers. So as a country, and this is, I'm sure this is something that has been experienced in very many other countries that have reported the pandemic in the magnitude that we have experienced it as a country. We have witnessed job losses, pay cuts across various sectors, and of course, incomes for most businesses have continued to dip as working hours for people have continued to fall significantly, especially when the curfew hours were ending at 7 p.m. Many people had really to close businesses early, and those in employment had to leave workplaces early just to ensure that they are within the curfew directives. And what this has done is that it has caused a massive dip in profits and the incomes that businesses have experienced in the past. So a good example is the transport sector in Kenya. It has suffered hugely because we had a limitation of movement in and out of particular counties. So we had restriction, for instance, movement was restricted within Nairobi and other particular counties in the coast where the pandemic was reported as being, escalating. And due to the limitation in movement, transport sector has been affected. The other reason why it has been affected greatly is because we had a reduction of the capacity, the passenger capacity reduced to 60% in order to allow for social distancing within the public service vehicles. And of course, because of the reduced working hours, this has had a great impact on the sector. The other sector that I think has been really greatly affected, of course, is the hospitality industry and broadly the tourism sector, because we have seen that both, domestic and international tourists could no longer patronize their favorite tourist destinations because we had all these restrictions and, of course, the need to keep precautionary measures and to ensure that you do everything you can to avoid catching this virus. As we speak, thousands of hotel workers lost their jobs, and the few that remained working suffered huge pay cuts. Right now, we have a bit of opening up. The world, the country here is also slowly opening up, but very few people are willing to patronize hotels with the pandemic still not contained and a vaccine not yet found. So this means that hotels are still not operating optimally. Now, the other sector, and which is of great interest to the conversation we are having today, is the flower sector and broadly the horticulture subsectors of the agriculture sector. These ones actually remain the worst hit. They're arguably the worst hit sectors because as early as around mid-March, we had about 30,000 temporary workers losing their jobs. We also had about 40,000 permanent workers being sent home on leave. We have many who remain on unpaid leave. Others remain out of employment. Although we are aware that now the sector is slowly opening up and many people are starting to get jobs, thousands are still out there without jobs because, of course, airspaces were closed, flights had to close down, and that meant that exports could no longer go out in the same volume as they did previously. So this is one of the sectors that has really taken a dip. And the reason why it is of great interest to us as the Kenya Human Rights Commission is because over the past about 4 years, we have been implementing a project that we call the Women at Work campaign. We have been part of this campaign, which is funded by the HIVOS Foundation. So what we have been doing is that over a period of 4 years, we have been working very closely with the flower sector players, mainly the workers in that sector, empowering them, building their capacity to engage around, conversations around their rights, and also just pushing them to be able to advocate for better and decent living conditions. So this is what we have done in the last 4 years. And that is why when this sector took a beating, then it has been of interest to us to also ask ourselves, what are we able to do better? Given the fact that the situation is difficult, this is a global health pandemic that quickly spiraled into an economic pandemic, quickly scuttling many things that had been put in place, including many gains that had been secured in a sector like the flower sector. So this conversation therefore becomes extremely important, because we will be asking ourselves, do businesses have an obligation to respect rights in the face of adversity, in the face of a difficult situation such as the ones we face? What can we do as workers who have lost jobs, who are on pay cuts? What is the recourse? What is the role of government to ensure that rights are respected and protected even during a pandemic? What is the way of securing gains that have been made over time to ensure that the sector can bounce back? So this is the conversation we are going to be having, and I invite all of you to the conversation. And to start us off, I will invite Henry Wera. So Henry works with the HIVOS. HIVOS is an international a humanist organization that has been supporting lots of work in the country here and beyond. And Henry will be taking us through the findings and recommendations of a rapid assessment that was undertaken in Kenya. And he will also offer reflections from what has been happening in other countries in as far as the horticulture sectors in those particular countries is concerned, because the rapid assessment that was commissioned by HIVOS also had a bearing on the countries around ourselves. So Southern Africa, for instance, was also part of this, and therefore he will share broad reflections from that sphere. Now, Henry is an experienced program manager with a background in development and human rights advocacy, research, policy advocacy in areas of women empowerment and youth development. He has more than 10 years of experience in grants and project management, and he seeks to leverage his expertise and experience in research, program management, grant management, and financial management to ensure a full-blown project cycle management. So I'd like to just give the floor to Henry. He has 15 minutes to share with us the findings of this rapid assessment that he was conducted, and then we shall move on with the rest of the program. Henry, you have the floor, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mary. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon indeed, everyone. It's a great pleasure to join the webinar this afternoon. Just on reimagining a decent world of work and during and after this pandemic that caught every one of us in the development world by surprise. And indeed, thank you so much, Mary, for the elaborate introduction. And in fact, for putting into perspective the work that we do in partnership with the Kenya Human Rights Commission as HIVOS, together with other civil society organizations in Kenya and in the African region at large. Indeed, the campaign we have been doing is looking at issues of decent work with a keen focus on the horticulture sector. And when we talk decent work, we are talking about issues of decent pay. We are talking issues of good labor practices. We are looking at leadership, and more so gender sensitive leadership. We want to see most of our women rise into those leadership positions in those farms, since they are the majority of the workers, about 75% or above in the horticulture sector workers are women. Apart from issues of occupancy with the union and freedom to associate and to organize. And so indeed, it's my great pleasure to just in a nutshell, share with this meeting the findings that we came up with as a campaign together with our partners in the course when the COVID pandemic erupted in Africa. And so this study was conducted in the month of April. And so I'm sure a number of things might have changed either way, but so far, this is the report we have. And so I will briefly take us through this report, and then we can have a further interaction later. To begin with, is that the horticulture sector, we could easily divide it into two. We have the flowers and the other food that are produced in the sector. And so it's important to note that the two items took a different impact in terms of the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Flowers generally are taken as luxuries. And so when the major flower market closed in Europe, the direct impact was that the whole sector came to a standstill and operations were very minimal. And that had several impacts, as we'll see shortly. The other sector where we had vegetables and fruits, the crisis brought about a higher demand for foodstuffs, even though the costs went up of those foodstuffs because of issues of transportation and logistical costs that came upon, especially with the restrictions of movements and the lockdowns of both air, land, and water transportation. And so that also had an impact on lives and livelihoods of workers and communities. And so just to lay the background is to say that about 75% of the horticulture products produced in Kenya and indeed the African region at large find their way into the European market. Specifically for flowers, we have about 75% of our flowers being sold in the flower auction in the Netherlands. And so what happened when the auction market was closed, it means we lost 75% of our market. And that had got a direct bearing on the lives of workers who are involved in the chain. I'm being reminded to say my name. I actually recognize that Mary Campbell extensively mentioned my name. My name is Henry Wera. I work for HIVOS East Africa as a regional advocacy officer. And together with the other partners, we pushed on the wheel on advocacy for decent work in the horticulture sector. So the closure of market meant, one, that we had about 50% or more of job losses. The employers in the horticulture sector either had to send their workers on compulsory leaves, either on unpaid leaves. Some of them had to be engaged intermittently. Intermittently here referring to the arrangement where instead of working 4 weeks in a month, you'd work for 1 week in a month and another lot would come and work another week. So that meant that also your salary had to go down by 3/4 so that it could be spread out to the other workers who are also to work intermittently. So job losses was one of the major impacts that came with the COVID pandemic. And indeed, it was a severe shock because some of these workers were heavily or rather fully reliant on the income that they were earning through the salaries and the wages that they were earning in the sector. Some other companies are to introduce even night shifts. Remember, in Africa, there are variations of the COVID restrictions. In some contexts, there was total lockdown, like Uganda, where you are not completely allowed to get out of your house. And therefore, you are supposed to, some farms had to organize temporary shelter where workers would work both some daytime, some at night, in order to ensure that their minimal operations continue. In other contexts, like in Kenya, where we had a curfew that was beginning at 6 p.m., it meant that the work hours had to be designed in such a way that workers would be home before the curfew time and others would join before the curfew time to work during the night hours. And so that too was a key issue that was revealed through this rapid assessment. In terms of the general awareness and the way the firms and the employers manage the COVID infections and the effect on the health and the safety of workers, the finding was quite positive that the employers had put in a lot of effort to do education and to provide sanitation facilities for the workers in order to minimize and to mitigate the impact of this pandemic in the health and the lives of workers. And this was a good positive which was picked. There was generally good awareness among the workers concerning the issues of the infections and transmission ways of COVID and the ways in which it could be prevented. However, because of the reduced workforce who had to still deliver on the targets, there was some increased level of fatigue among the workers, because at some point they still had to meet some targets, yet there was a heavy reduction in terms of their numbers in those particular workplaces. In terms of decent work issues, just like Mary Campbell has mentioned, just before the pandemic, we agree, all of us, that there were some very good strides already made in terms of anchoring decent work issues in the workplaces. Some very good efforts in terms of mitigation of sexual harassment in the firms. Very good efforts in terms of ensuring that minimum wages and even be above minimum wages were being paid to workers. And what happened that when the pandemic came into force, some of these gains were lost, because when workers have been relieved of their work, then they have come from a point where they were earning at least minimum wages to a point where they're earning nothing. And that really had a great impact on their livelihoods. The pandemic as well had got an impact on the trade unions, because when it happened, then they lost their bargaining power. You know, when your members have been relieved of their work, it means they're no longer your members, so you can't speak for them anymore. And that's one interesting bit. Some CBAs being suspended meant that workers could no longer continue enjoying some of those benefits that were negotiated by the trade unions through those CBAs. And those are just part of the impacts that were taken. However, we also recognize that the trade unions did not just sit back and do nothing. They continue to engage with government, with employers and employers associations to try to minimize the direct impact of this pandemic on the workers. And indeed, some of the gains that we also recognized during the pandemic at the peak in April came as a result of that tripartite working relationship between the trade unions, the employers, and government. In terms of the outlook for the future, the pandemic came in with a number of impacts. Generally, workers feeling uncertain about the future, generally feeling hopeless in terms of the recovery of the sector. And that was clearly coming up with most respondents feeling, of course, we recognize that a majority of workers in our horticulture sector are immigrants. They are people who have moved from various parts of the country to coalesce around those farms to be able to provide labor. And so there was a general feeling that they would be able to migrate back to their native homes so that they could be able to cope up with the hardships. There was a great impact in terms of the humanitarian situation, because all of a sudden you have a big number of our population in the sector who are now having no income, but they have to continue surviving. They have to pay rents for the houses they live in. Some who are living in company houses have been evicted and they no longer have those houses. They have to rent outside. Of course, coupled with the issue that schools were closed and all the children are now locked at home, it meant that there was an increased burden for home care for these children, for the entire family. Yet they have also lost their employment and their income. So generally there was a livelihood crisis, need for food, need for shelter, need for other life supporting necessities, which also came up during this study. Not to forget about gender-based violence, which was also noted to have taken an increase during this pandemic. A lot of GBV was reported during this period. And so in terms of social structural shifts, we take note of increase in cost of household commodities for the obvious reason that demand went up, and obviously the supply was also not very enough. So the cost also went up, and that also brought a very interesting crisis in the sector. Of course, generally food security for a majority, because now they lacked resources. They were not able to efficiently meet the cost of living for their lives and their livelihoods and the people they were supporting. Reduced wages was a key outcome, a key point to note in the result of this study, because some of them had to be paid a quarter of what they were earning in a month, because now they are engaged 1 week in 4 weeks. And so that meant the wages were reduced. Some of them had zero wages because they are on unpaid leave. And so that further complicated the crisis. The study came up with a few recommendations based on the findings for policymakers. And one of it was to just be able to expand the social safety net programs to cater for workers as a vulnerable group, because it came out strongly that this pandemic has exposed them to a lot of economic hardships. And so the recommendation was that workers in such a sector needs to be protected under the social safety net for the government. And so there was need to push for this agenda and to ensure that government would be able to factor this in their allocations. Among other things, like the cost of NHIF, why can't government then reduce it for workers? Government tried to make some initiatives like tax relief, reducing the percentages for the income tax. However, the study noted that most workers in the flower sector did not benefit from this tax relief, because majority of them were earning below the 25,000, below 10,000 Kenya shillings. So they did not benefit from that tax relief at all. To the civil society organizations, there was a recommendation that there was need to continue to lobby for transparency and accountability on the part of government. We recently, for those of us who are in Kenya, we saw what happened with the COVID funds, or rather COVID donations under KEMSA. And these are the kind of things that we the report highlighted that we need to put our strength together and advocate for transparency and more accountability by government and the duty bearers, including the employers. Of course, the other recommendation to trade unions was to continue with their advocacy and speaking for workers in these difficult periods, so that workers do not remain abandoned simply because they have lost their job. So that trade unions continue indeed to be a voice for these workers who have been affected by this pandemic. The other recommendation was that players and CSOs could come together to continue to mobilize global markets to support workers. Global markets in Europe and elsewhere where the products here are taken to, just to be able to extend a hand of help to these workers who are now facing this kind of a crisis. Apart from just designing innovative economic livelihood programs, perhaps one of the key lessons that every one of us needs to come out of this pandemic is that we need to diversify in terms of our economic and livelihood programs, so that even in the horticulture sector, we need to diversify and look into other ways where we could diversify our income streams, not just flowers, but having a mix of flowers and vegetables and fruits, so that when one commodity takes up a hit during a crisis, another commodity can continue to indeed generate income and support the lives and livelihoods of the workers who are involved in the sector. And therefore, in a nutshell, is to say that this was a rapid assessment which was conducted in April. And in my view, a number of findings could have changed as of now, but still there's need for the development partners and stakeholders to continue thinking and coming up with innovative measures and ways of trying to support the sector to rise again and to ensure that we could again re-establish the gains we had made just before the pandemic hit. Mary, I think my time is up and I want to stop there for now and give it back to you. Maybe we can come back later during Q&A. Thank you, Mary.
Indeed, Henry, and thank you very much for that very insightful presentation on the recommendations, on the findings and the recommendations of the rapid assessment that was undertaken by HIVOS in April. That was very illuminating in terms of the issues. And I agree with you, as you have said constantly in your presentation, the situation might have changed between the time the study was conducted and the current situation in the flower sector. You have unearthed very elaborately the situation that flower farm workers were going through, especially immediately COVID struck the country, because immediately that happened, we had closure of markets in Europe, and that had a very huge trickling effect that was experienced in the country. And to put your presentation into perspective and to actually confirm whether the situation has improved and to what extent, we have Faith Iminza, who will be joining us immediately after your presentation. Faith Iminza is actually a flower farm worker. She is currently working in one of the flower farms in Naivasha. She has more than 12 years of experience in the farms. She's risen through the ranks from a general worker, and she's currently a production supervisor. She has played a pivotal role in shaping the gender justice discourse at the workplace through her participation in the gender committee that she now is chairperson of the gender committee. And she has also promoted to a great extent health and safety standards at the workplace, because she has been a member of the health and safety committees within the workplace. She's also leading in conversations around first aid responses at the workplace. And she also doubles up as a promoter of HIV HIV/AIDS, campaigns within the workplace and also around her community. So Faith will be putting into perspective and she will be sharing from her own experience how has she experienced COVID-19 times in the flower sector, Faith being a flower worker herself. So I invite Faith Iminza to take the floor, and she has 10 minutes to share with us what it has been like. Immediately COVID struck the country, but also right now when life is slowly going back to normal, our workers going back to work, our salaries reinstated. Faith, you have the floor to illuminate on that particular subject. Karibu sana, Faith Iminza. Faith, are you in the call with us? I had seen that Faith was with us, and I'm hoping she has not experienced challenges. I'm trying to get a hold of Faith, who was already in the call earlier, checking whether she is having issues. I think in the meantime, as we wait for Faith to join us, I believe it's just technical hitches she's experiencing. I think we can also really be able to paint the picture globally to look at the obligations of business and those of government in as far as protection and respecting human rights is concerned. We will be painting this picture from, a global perspective, but also regionally and locally, to see what obligations are there for businesses to respect, to protect rights, and what obligations are there for businesses to ensure that they respect rights even during a difficult time such as the one we are currently experiencing, because you see, rights remain intact, and even when we experience difficulties as a country and as a globe, we can confidently say that human rights have not been shelved. Human rights are still intact and would require to be respected and to be protected. But the challenges are there, and those are what we are having a conversation around. And to help us, unpack that conversation, we are joined by Andrew Odete, who is the East and Southern African advisor. Andrew is currently working at the Danish Institute for Human Rights, where he's broadly, he is a human rights practitioner with a lot of years of experience in human rights work. He's also an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. He has contributed a very, very great deal to policy dialogue with both state actors and non-state actors in Africa and beyond. He has also played a very great role in coordinating inter-country multi-stakeholder movements and initiatives. He, around particular subjects that would include trade justice, gender, corporate social responsibility, corporate accountability, international criminal law and justice. He has also been involved in livelihood development, among others. He has previously worked with the HIVOS, and he also had a short stint at Fairtrade Africa. He also worked for quite some length of time at the Kenya Human Rights Commission. And before that, he also worked with the Children's Legal Action Network. So Andrew has really a wide range of experience on business and human rights issues. And when I thought about this topic and someone to put this particular issue into perspective, I almost could not think of a better person. So we are really happy that Andrew could join us. And we are happy that Andrew, you're in the call already and you have the floor. So you can take your 15 minutes. Your 15 minutes here. Karibu sana, Andrew. You are muted. I think you're still muted, Andrew. Great. I think. Yes.
Oh, great. I think I was unmuted by the host. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mary, for that ringing introduction. You may have oversold in that introduction. I'll try to live up to that billing. Yes, the subject I've been given to communicate about today is business and governments and their obligations to respect and protect labor or human rights in difficult times. I will speak through three main frameworks. First, I'll give a broad legal basis for business and human rights relating to businesses and state obligations. I'll give the core categories of rights that might need to be protected, being some of the more prominent issues that are coming up. And in conclusion, I'll give a brief discussion on the future of work, particularly how to build back better so that the labor force, the labor sector is able to be resilient to some of the human rights challenges that exist at the moment. So to begin with, the legal basis for business and human rights in the current context. Of course, the Constitution of Kenya at Article 20 states that the Bill of Rights applies to all law and binds the state and all other persons. So it's applicable across the board to state, juristic persons, and natural persons. So that simply means state, companies, as well as you and I, natural persons. The Constitution, of course, in the Bill of Rights, spells out some of the rights which are supposed to be protected and which have a bearing on labor rights, including the right to life, equality and freedom from discrimination, protection of human dignity, protection from slavery, servitude, forced labor, freedom of assembly, demonstration, picketing and petition, labor relations, which is at Article 41, and economic and social rights at Article 43. Crucially, these rights and others apply even in difficult times like this. Even in a state of emergency, the rights that are to be circumvented normally must be or should be stipulated by government through official channels, and only where those stipulations are reasonable in the curtailment of the human rights for the achievement of the purpose would they stand normally. They also need to be proportionately applied. But that does not apply to our situation. The human rights of persons in Kenya are intact, save for regulations that also call for containment, restrictions on transport, curfew orders, and things like that. And of course, social distancing. But those must also be proportionately applied. Of course, Kenya is also part of the Global Committee and part of the global conversation on the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, where we recognize the state duty to protect against business violations on human rights, the corporate responsibility to prevent such violations, and the duty by state, the duty of state and corporate entities alike to ensure that there are adequate remedies in this regard. So the ILO, this is not a new situation. The ILO standards have contemplated situations such as this, maybe not specifically a pandemic, but disruptive situations such as this that have an adverse bearing on labor rights. So you'll find that the standards provide specific guidance on labor rights and decent work in crisis responses. The Employment and Decent Work for Peace and Resilience Recommendation 2017 stipulates that crisis state responses should accord with the protection of all human rights and the rule of law, including respect for fundamental principles and rights at work. It further recommends that member states implement comprehensive strategies for enabling recovery while at the same time building the resilience of people who may have been affected. So in this case, member states, talking of government responsibility, their responsibilities involve stabilizing livelihoods and income through immediate social protection and employment measures. I'll come back to that and say 1 or 2 points about that. Secondly, to promote economic recovery for employment and decent work opportunities and socio-economic reintegration. Thirdly, to conduct employment impact assessment of national recovery programs. It also requires the state to promote social dialogue and collective bargaining, to build or restore labor market institutions, including employment services for the purpose of stabilization and recovery. And lastly, to take measures that are appropriate for the socio-economic reintegration of persons who have been affected by the crisis. I'd like to speak to 5 core areas, particularly those, some of which Henry mentioned, some of the practical areas where rights violations have been rife, particularly in the context of the COVID pandemic. These are fair remuneration and job security. I'll also speak to freedom of association, social dialogue, and collective bargaining. Thirdly, I'll speak to social protection, social security, and economic stimulus support. Number 4, I'll speak to occupational safety and health. And lastly, discrimination in employment. So on fair remuneration and job security, this is what goes first. And this is the most crucial because for livelihood of workers and even for businesses, they need sustenance in this way. What can the government do and what should businesses do? Of course, under these circumstances, the government should first and foremost enforce the Employment Act, which forbids the termination of employment without the express advancement of a valid reason for such termination. And such a valid reason should relate to the capacity or conduct of the worker or on the operational requirements of the undertaking. So many companies are coming up and saying the operational requirements are such that they cannot sustain the labor force and they're terminating employees. But this has to be done in accordance with the law. So although Kenya has not ratified the convention number 158 of 1982, which is the ILO's termination of employment convention, it gives guidance on how termination can be done. And it simply says that where the impacts, where owing to the impacts of such eventualities as COVID-19, of course it doesn't talk about COVID, an employee is placed on enforced leave with full, part, or no pay, or retained on a fraction of the contractual wages or salary. Any such variation in contractual terms should be subject to a consultative process between the employer and the employee. So trade unions and workers' representatives should be involved in negotiating how contracts are varied at the workplace at this moment. In the interest of time, I'll just skim through some of the other aspects. I'm having a bit of challenges with my system here. Pardon me. Hello? Can you hear me?
We can hear you,
hear
Andrew. Yes.
Okay, for some reason, it all went off the screen. I'm trying to retrieve it. Yeah. So the next element is freedom of association, social dialogue, and collective bargaining. And that's an area where you'll find that at the onset of the pandemic, many employers said, you know what, all those continuing negotiations are at an end until further notice. Trade unions, we are fighting for our own existence as businesses for now. Can we talk about this later? What does the law say of the government and business responsibility about freedom of association, social dialogue, and collective bargaining? So the role that workers' organizations play in ensuring decent working conditions and labor rights is critical, and the ability of workers to join and form these organizations should not be undermined in efforts to address COVID-19. If anything, it's more critical at this point. So they should be consulted properly. The memberships should be consulted in line with the Constitution and also with the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. The government should uphold the freedom of association of workers and the specific rights to form, join, or participate in activities of an association of any kind. So collective bargaining is given a strong billing in the different frameworks that you can refer to, whether at African Union level or even at ILO level. The third element I'd like to talk to, which is also a challenge and which strikes right at the heart of resilience of the workforce, is social protection, social security, and economic stimulus support. So, whereas the government has taken steps towards providing economic stimulus support to workers, as a means of mitigating some of the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, it should take further steps to ensure that these measures are effective. For instance, it should expand the cash transfer program and other socioeconomic safety nets to workers in precarious employment, particularly workers in the lowest paid cadres. It should establish economic rescue and stimulus packages at national and county levels to provide sustenance for micro, small, and medium enterprises. The government should also go on to ensure that all workers have social security. As a matter of law, all workers are entitled to be registered with NSSF. The NSSF not only gives you peace of mind and sustenance in times of retirement, but it also ensures that you can plan with a disposable income, knowing that you have something to hold on to for the future as well, kept away. So in cases of pandemics such as this, those are a big assurance. Social security, all employers should register their employees under the NSSF scheme and ensure that payments and contributions either way are up to date. I'll speak to occupational safety and health, which is very crucial, seeing that COVID, first and foremost, is a health-based problem. Employers are required by law to take precautions to check against spread of diseases at the workplace. So in Kenya, that's governed under the Occupational Safety and Health Act. which stipulates that every employer shall ensure the safety, health, and welfare at work of all persons working in his workplace. So their guidelines need to be put in place at the workplace, including those that relate to containment of the COVID-19 pandemic at the workplace. So employers should maintain the workplace in a condition that is safe and without risks, and they should conduct appropriate risk assessments at every point. They should establish safety and health committees at the workplace in line with quite a number of ILO standards, and employees should not be billed or surcharged for expenses for the implementation of occupational safety and health measures. This is contained in a raft of legislation nationally, but also the ILO standards. And lastly, I'd like to talk to the issue of discrimination in employment and occupation. At times like this, there are people who are more vulnerable than others in terms of having their human rights and labor rights respected. Of course, the Constitution guarantees equality at Article 27. The right not to be discriminated against in employment and occupation is also one of the 4 key areas of fundamental principles and rights enshrined in the ILO Conventions on Equal Remuneration. That's Convention 100 of 1951. These have been ratified by Kenya, and they talk about every individual having being entitled to the enjoyment of these rights as recognized and guaranteed in the Charter without distinction of any kind, including race, ethnic group, color, sex, language. Maybe just to bring it back home, in Kenya, we have, through the National Baseline Assessment on Business and Human Rights, we have categories which have been designated as particularly vulnerable in the context of employment. And these include the women, religious minorities, persons living with HIV and AIDS, persons with disability, ethnic minorities, and so on. Employers should ensure that they have frameworks at the workplace that have early warning systems that can detect the vulnerability of certain demographics within the workplace and put in place frameworks for addressing some of these issues. So the government has a responsibility to eliminate discrimination in employment and occupation by ensuring inspections and ensuring enforcement of laws, ensure equal pay for work of equal value, especially at this time, on account of women who cannot work because they have children at home who must be taken care of. There should be childcare facilities where appropriate, but there should be an allowance for mothers, nursing mothers who are unable to undertake their responsibilities because of the childcare roles that befall them. There should be gender-sensitive social and cultural norms. So the government, working with other stakeholders, should sensitize communities and workers on equality and non-discrimination. Violence and harassment at work should be addressed through effective and comprehensive safeguarding mechanisms put in place by employers at the workplace. And there should be access to sexual and reproductive health services at the workplace. Lastly, in conclusion, just to give a brief on resilience. How do we enhance resilience? How do we get out of this? And when we do, how do we deal with future problems of this sort? Again, the law and the guiding principles give a bit of guidance on how governments and businesses can address themselves to the future of work. For instance, instituting human rights due diligence procedures It is only in Africa now where we do not have legislation, mandatory legislation on human rights due diligence. I think the European community has now embraced that as a matter of course in the context of business practices. So these include early warning systems for businesses, but also frameworks that ensure that the vulnerabilities of different persons who come into contact with businesses are addressed at the different points. Governments, not necessarily one government, but governments and other actors should come together to ensure that there is resilience of businesses. This could be value chain led discussions. For instance, ensuring value chains against losses occasioned by eventualities, acts of God, and pandemics. Looking at the resilience of workers in Kenya, part of the role of government is as they seek to address through the universal health care, the NHIF, medical insurance for everybody, but can that medical insurance cater to the gravest needs of the society at times like this? For instance, if you are on the basic NHIF cover at the moment, can that cover for your treatment, isolation under the COVID treatment regime, for instance? And when the Constitution says everybody has a right to basic health care, can this be redefined to include supporting the resilience of the most needy workers at the time of need, such as this? Access to remedies. The state should ensure that there, at times of emergencies like this, there are official remedies, state-based remedies, channels for seeking remedies, such as judicial as well as non-judicial. And the state should also ensure that businesses put in place at operational level grievance redress mechanisms that provide credible remedy frameworks for workers at this time. Lastly, the state should adopt the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights to ensure that human rights safeguards, including the duties of state, the responsibilities of businesses, are addressed adequately. There's a legal and policy framework that advances the human rights of persons in the context of business. In the interest of time, I beg to end there and probably invite a deeper discussion at plenary. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew, for an extremely insightful presentation. I think speaking for everybody, I think we would need more time for this kind of a conversation, because this was extremely rich. And I believe that there's a lot more that you could say on this particular subject. Thank you for reminding us, Andrew, that human rights are intact even during this particular difficult period. I think at some point we have been tempted to think that human rights have been shelved because there has been all manner of arbitrary decisions, especially by employers across sectors, mainly because profits have dipped. We have seen very arbitrary decisions taken. And I have been thinking, we have been in a phase where we have never been faced by a pandemic. As a country, we have not experienced this. Globally, it has been experienced, but very, very many years ago. I do not think anyone of us in this call has lived to experience any other pandemic. And we have been in a phase where businesses have made profits over the years. So we are faced with a very difficult situation. And I thought this was the one time that businesses were called really to stand with the workers that have generated profits for all these years. Thank you really for reminding us actually that there are already standards, international labor standards, that anticipated that a crisis such as this could befall a people, and therefore has offered guidelines on how and how governments and businesses could respond. And I think really as a country, and many of the other countries that are represented in this call, it is about time for us to start imagining a time where we could be canvassing a conversation around these conventions, ratifying these conventions as a country, because they offer very useful guidelines, as you have illuminated in your presentation. And as a country, we do not have a law that had envisaged a pandemic before. We have seen regulations now being put in place, but already the thinking has been there. And I think it would be a good thing for civil society organizations to begin thinking about life after COVID and the need to create a framework that guides our behavior during difficult times such as this. You have also helped us to see the areas around which businesses are particularly urged to be vigilant, areas of occupational safety and health, issues of freedom of association and expression at the workplace, ensuring that the environment is safe and that further transmissions do not happen in the workplace. Really, that was very useful. And also for injecting perspectives around gender sensitivity, that was really useful. And the last call there on businesses to actualize the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. And I think at that point, at this juncture, it's useful to just mention that, of course, Kenya is poised to be the first country to have a national action plan, the first country in Africa. Let me just make that clarification. The first country in Africa to implement a national action plan on business and human rights. And that's a point of pride for the country, but also injecting life in these standards, because the UN guiding principles have also envisaged difficult times for businesses, for workers, and these could be times of crime and war zone, and war zone especially, and pandemics. So it is a useful guide. We missed Faith Iminza, who was supposed to speak at the second slot, because she was supposed to help us to see, having had the reflection on the findings of the impact assessment and the recommendations, and we are alive to the fact that there may be changes between the time of the assessment and currently. We wanted to have a feel of how it is for a flower farm worker. How are they experiencing the pandemic? Faith Iminza is still experiencing technical hitches, but coincidentally, we have her namesake, Justirian Iminza, who would be able to weigh in and just for about 5 to 10 minutes tell us how they have experienced the pandemic as workers in the flower sector in Kenya. At this point, I want to invite Iminza to weigh in and tell us how the picture looks like now in the sector. So Faith, Justirian Iminza, if you could unmute yourself, you have 10 minutes. I hope you're still on the call, and welcome to take the floor.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I can see you have unmuted. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Justirian Iminza. I'm in Russia. I speak of 7-8 years. And I welcome everybody here. And the way we have in mid-March 2020, and I can say as flower farms, we realized the problem immediately Because first of all, our market, which is Netherlands, was closed immediately. Second, the airplane for transporting flowers was closed, it couldn't move anywhere. So that the employers, they had nothing else to do than to send the temporary workers home immediately. And for us, we who are permanent workers, we had to be given half pay with immediate effect. And as you know, when you are earning half, that the time the life becomes very difficult. So all of flower workers experience a lot of problems because the budget increased immediately. As we know, we closed the school, all schools were closed immediately. So our children had to come back home, which we did not expect that year. So as we go ahead, as we went through that COVID-19, the gender-based violence increased a lot because most of us, we work with our spouse in the flower farms. And you can imagine when all of you have been sent home and you have a family in the house. So that's the time most of the families had a lot of problems about GBV. And we are having a single house. And that time you are having 5 to 6 children. All of them are in the house with you and your husband. So we faced a lot of problem up to now, but for now we thank God because things are now coming normal. Because for now we can say 85% of our workers have come back. Amen. Have come back to our normal work. And now we can say everything is going back very soon to normal. I can thank our
It looks like we lost connection from Iminza.
Yeah.
Miri, take over.
Thank you, Bernard. Yeah, it looks like we lost Iminza. I think we will bring her back at the point of question and answer. But I picked that it's really great to hear that life is slowly going back to normal, and that 80% of workers in the flower farms have actually resumed. What I needed clarity around is whether it is the flower farm where Iminza works or whether this is reflective of the entire sector, but we hope that we will get Iminza back. Yeah, I think it's been great so far. And what is coming out very clearly is that the pandemic has exposed and exacerbated the vulnerabilities and the inequalities that have existed for a long time in supply chains, especially the horticulture supply chains. And we have recently been called on by the High Commissioner, the UN High Commissioner, recently in a speech around June, called upon all of us to, especially businesses, actually she was making reference to businesses, and she urged businesses to build back better. And that has been the rallying call right now as we talk about the impact of COVID on businesses. we are saying that the pandemic has also really presented as an opportunity. And when I say us, I'm referring to business. So it has presented businesses an opportunity to actually think of building a better future for everyone along the supply chain, and especially the workers that have for a long time given their all to make the profits that have been earned over the years before the pandemic was experienced. And she called upon businesses to make human rights the center of their business models. And actually, the call was to urge that even as we reflect on the pandemic and the effect it has had on the economy and the businesses, there should be a reflection of how the pandemic has impacted on human rights, because this is not just a health pandemic that has affected economy, but it has severely affected human rights. So having said that, actually, I will be asking, when we come to the question and answer, that is the first question I would like to pose to Andrew. How would a building back better, model look like? So you will mull over that, Andrew, when we come to the question and answer. I'm sneaking that question because I have the privilege of moderating, and therefore I'm sneaking the question to be the first that you will pick. You will tell us, how would it look like for businesses to build back better? And at this juncture, because we're not doing very well in terms of time, I want to invite my co-moderator, Davis Malombe, who is the Deputy Executive Director at the Kenya Human Rights Commission, to run us through the second session. Karibu sana, Davis.
Mary and the team for the good progress so far. Just to remind ourselves that this week we are also commemorating the 10th anniversary since the promulgation of the Constitution, which is big in terms of the protection of the rights of workers, and also protection of the rights of workers as human beings, as Andrew Odete has referenced in his insightful presentation. And we also have some comments in the chat, and therefore we ask also the panelists to also keep on responding to those emerging issues there. So we move to the next session, which is dealing with mainly duty bearers. The first one was mainly on rights orders and the issues which have emerged. So the first one to take us through that is Ngozana Mwigai, who is a flowers manager at Fairtrade. Fairtrade is known for helping producers in developing achievable, sustainable, and equitable trade relationships. And then no wonder the topic we have put there is promoting sustainability in the horticulture sector, lessons from Fairtrade, which is very big in this aspect of things. Mr. Mwigai is a development practitioner with over 10 years experience in developing and executing sustainability programs in conservation, tourism, extractives, agriculture, and horticulture sectors with government, private sector, and NGOs. He's very passionate about working with businesses across supply chains and communities to implement social, environmental, commercial best practices that reduce global inequalities and promote sustainability. These areas of interest and specialization include, among others, project management, sustainable development, natural resource management, business development, among others. Karibu sana, Comrade Ngozana Mwigai, to take us through that topic I've just talked about. Karibu sana, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. It's good to be in this forum, quite engaging. I'll be running you through Fairtrade's experience during this period. My particular topic is on the issue of promoting sustainability in the horticultural sector. And we'll be discussing some of the lessons that we have experienced through our program. I don't know whether it's possible to share my screen, but if not, I can just talk through. So Fairtrade is an alternative.
Yes, you can share your screen.
Okay, just hold on.
And you can also turn on your video, Gonzaga, if you don't mind.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So I'm looking for a point where I can need to share my screen, but no problem, I can still talk through. Fairtrade is an alternative to conventional trade, and we work or we exist to ensure that producers and workers can be able to secure and have sustainable livelihoods. We achieve this through what we call through different pillars, and one of the pillars is the Fairtrade Standard, which mainly promotes a certification program that is aligned to certain best practices and standards, including ILO standards, especially in relation to decent work conditions and labor. In East Africa, we have in the category that I manage, the flower category, we work in East Africa, and we have about 63 producers and about 50 producers from Kenya. And Kenya is the biggest exporter of Fairtrade certified flowers to the northern market. Therefore, the challenges I think that have been discussed by the earlier presenters are not unique. Producers, the producers we're working with have faced similar challenges, and I don't want to dwell on that, but I want to talk about Fairtrade itself as a scheme and as a certification program, and how it has enabled workers, particularly during these COVID-19 times in relation to relief and resilience. As I mentioned earlier, that the Fairtrade certification program has the Fairtrade standards, which outline some requirements that producer organizations need to align to become certified and compliant. Recently, Fairtrade introduced what we are calling a floor wage requirement, which is a minimum wage protection for workers to ensure that workers are not being paid below international poverty lines. And this is aligned to the World Bank purchasing power parity rates. This may not have affected producers in Kenya, which is what you're discussing, but in other Fairtrade certified, in other countries where we have producers, we did see significant improvements in wages for workers, especially in Ethiopia and Uganda, where we don't have an existing minimum wage for the sector. Increases of between 40 to 100%, which we believe which is something that has helped cushion workers even during this time of COVID-19. So the workers that are still continuing to work in the farms. Within the Fairtrade standards, producers are required to meet a series of labor requirements, and therefore producers, workers that are still working in Fairtrade certified farms are still being protected in terms of their occupational health and safety. In areas where there has been disruptions and there has been layoffs of workers, the standard is there to ensure that the right procedures such as the HR or labor requirements are still adhered to by the producers. And the certification body, which is FLOSAT, is there to respond to this and ensure that even within these difficult times that the workers' rights and the human rights continue to be observed in the changes, the disruptions and the changes that are still happening within the operations in the farm. Another area that I want to talk about is the issue of empowerment of workers, which is at the heart of fair trade. And we approach empowerment in different approaches. And one is what we call the fair trade premium. And the fair trade premium is an additional amount of money that is paid by the end consumer of fair trade certified commodities. In this case, for example, in a bunch of roses and some additional cents may be paid by the consumer. And this money goes directly back to the workers within the flower farms where the fair trade sales were made. And the workers invest this money in their own personal development or initiatives. During this COVID-19 phase, flower farms that had premiums that were unspent, workers were able to use these premiums to be able to respond to some of the challenges they were having. Premiums were have been used to procure PPEs for workers and their families. Premiums have been used also to pay to supplement workers' income in form of cash disbursement of food rations. And these are resources that have been generated as a result of additional investments from the supply chain actors towards the empowerment of workers. As Fair Trade also, we are part of what we are calling the Living Wage Coalition with ISIL, Rainforest Alliance, and other certification entities. And we also have a vision where we need to push for higher decent income at worker level. Currently, we are piloting a couple of schemes in collaboration with some of the sector players or supply chain actors who are paying more into some of the farms where they are purchasing their flowers, so that we can be able to boost the income that is going to the workers. So these are some of the measures that certification schemes working across the supply chain can be able to put in place to enhance working conditions within workers that then help cushion workers, especially in difficult times or in pandemics like this. Moving on, I think as Fair Trade, we've also been compelled to respond in our programs in terms of how we work in this sector and how we engage and support our producers. When the pandemic started, we developed what we are calling a producer relief and resilience fund, which was meant to help some of the producer organizations to cushion their workers and the farmers with the needs that were emerging. And the producer relief fund within the fair trade system has been able to, certified flower farms have been able to access some relief aid to supplement their growing needs to support their workers in protective equipment and also in food at this difficult time when workers are also losing their income. We're also setting up a producer resilience fund, and this is in collaboration with also the supply chain actors to be able to support businesses to start bouncing back from the effects of COVID-19. So beyond looking at the needs of workers, we're also looking at the needs of businesses. And I think these are some of the initiatives that the sector could look at. How can we work collaboratively across the supply chain? Lastly, I want to talk about a new, due to this COVID-19, we've had to rethink some of our approaches and our strategies also in our programs on the ground. And we are now developing new projects that are focused towards livelihood improvement, So looking at alternative or additional income or supplementary income for workers, or food supplementary projects for the workers, product diversification at farm level to ensure that businesses are also diversifying their sources of income beyond the single commodities they're currently dealing with, and continuing to spearhead the living wage pilots or scaling up the living wage pilots with additional supply chain actors. I think lastly, just to focus on Kenya, I think COVID-19 has presented, has disrupted the supply chain a lot. We've talked about the challenges with freights, the challenges with supply, but I think as a sector in Kenya, we need also to think about some of the strategies we need to put in place in our infrastructure and also our policies. Once during this COVID-19 period, we found a lot of disruption in the Kenyan supply. However, in countries such as Ethiopia, which had very well developed freight infrastructure, business has been as usual, and therefore some businesses might be lost by Kenyan flower farms. So I think these are some of the effects that COVID-19 will present to us. And I think as a sector, we need to start addressing some of these issues to be able to challenge and adapt to the new environment that we're facing. So I think that is it from my end in terms of Fairtrade's response and the opportunities that certification programs could present to the horticultural sector in such times. Thank you.
Thank you for your very interesting presentation, which has also enabled us to also understand the fact that your many certified farms also contribute a big chunk of exports to Western countries, especially in the Netherlands, and also the frameworks which you have, which have been very critical in application in this context. For example, your certification standards, how they have been applied to cushion workers in this context. And I think I would also throw a question to you. The extent to which that has been applied on practical sense of things in the context of COVID, I think is critical. Of course, the question of premiums, your premiums, and how they have been utilized to also support workers, especially the livelihood, provision of PPEs and other support mechanisms. I think that is quite innovative and quite novel. The Living Wage Coalition, you're talking about piloting schemes. So also to indicate where the piloting, where it is happening, but also the kind of relief funds you have talked about, those are also great innovations, which I think we need to sustain and expand. And you have finished by talking about rethinking approaches in terms of expanding support on livelihoods to the workers, and also diversification of businesses, and more innovation and responsibleness when it comes to pandemic and this kind of emergencies, just learning from Ethiopia. So I think we need to separately, I think moving forward, we need to explore further conversation outside this space about those great innovations by Ethiopia, which we Kenyans need to learn, because I think that is what grounded the operations in that sector. Thank you so much. That was amazing. So the next speaker is Wesley Siele, who is the Chief Executive Officer, Agricultural Employers Association, which is an association representing collective interests of employers in the agricultural sector. And the horticulture sector is a great stakeholder in this platform. So he's going to talk about the challenges faced by the horticulture sector in Kenya. How does bouncing back look like? And I think the former speaker has already touched based on some of the strategies they have in terms of enabling workers and employers bounce back. So I'm sure he's going to be building on that. So Comrade Wesley is the Chief Executive Officer of AEA, having worked there in various roles for the last 15 years. That's quite phenomenal. The association has been in existence since 1962. Wesley has supported more than members of the association who are growers of the cut flower, fresh produce, ranching, conservancies, and general agriculture. He has previously worked in Fidelis Kericho as a human resource manager, and he owns an MBA in human resource, a BA in sociology, a national diploma in human resource, full member of IHRM, Kenya Institute of Management, is a certified mediator by MTA International. He handles CBA negotiations for entire flower growers in Kenya. He's a member of Floriculture Wages Council, having been appointed to this position by CS Labor. So karibu sana, Mr. Wesley Siele. You have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much for that, Davis. And I also wish to thank my fellow panelists, Henry and Andrew, and also Iminsa. Thank you, Mary, for hosting us today. My presentation will mainly touch on the areas of challenges that we've faced as employers in the sector. As it's been indicated, Agricultural Employers Association is an association of growers. It was registered in 1962. It represents the collective interest of the employers in the sector. And we have 234 members, but 94 of them are flower farms. We negotiate a CBA as a collective bargaining agreement for the sector. This covers 73 flower farms in Kenya. And also we negotiate the CBA for Farmers Choice and for Sirgoek Flowers and for Homaline in Koru. So we work very closely with the Kenya Plantations and Agricultural Workers Union, where Imensa is one of the leaders. I'm happy to see her. We believe in fair labor practices and also in freedom of association as an industry. We will have this discussion on the challenges that we have faced. Number one, on the areas or the aspects of the human resource, that is the labor aspects, the logistical challenges which were also faced by the industry, which has been quite covered by Brother Mongai there, on all the challenges which we have faced as a country. And also we will cover on the market challenges and part of the interventions by the employers and some of the emerging trends which we are noticing at the moment, which are actually coming up. So when COVID-19 was declared a pandemic in Kenya in March, this posed a serious challenge for us as employers. Mainly, this is an issue that has never been handled before. And you see, for a long time before it ended up in Kenya, a number of our market destinations had actually been affected. You realize that Kenya exports their large number of flowers, about more than 70% actually goes to Europe, and then the other percentage goes to countries like Australia, to countries like America, Japan, China. So already the buyers had actually been affected by the COVID-19, even before we realized it in Kenya in March. And that posed a serious challenge because number one, maybe let me share on the labor aspect challenges which we were facing. I think Andrew has quite pointed out quite well that it is the responsibility of government to ensure compliance, especially with the Employment Act. But apparently, if you look at the legislations that we have, we really do not have any guidance when it comes to such a serious pandemic. So all of us were thrown to the deep end. We didn't know what to do because of lack of the legislative framework or guide to that. But we realized that we still had a window and an opening in terms of discussion with the social partners. And these included the unions that we negotiate with, that is the Kenya Plantation and Agricultural Workers Union, and also with the Ministry of Labor, which has actually been quite useful. Part of it has been included in a visit by the CS Labor. Honorable Chelugui has been able to go around the flower farms and see what we have been able to do as interventions and what we have been able to present to the ministry in terms of what we request them to do. So the options that were taken was to come out with an MOU, which we did with the union on the 19th of March. And within that MOU, that included the issues of unpaid leave, which I think we have quite discussed. So we had those options of unpaid leave. Number two is that we also had the options of us having the employees to do what we are calling part-time working. Have a number of employees to work for half of the month and another group to work half of the month, just to try and sustain the crop at that time. Send a number of employees on leave, which we did. Within that MOU, we really tried to restrict ourselves when it comes to redundancies, although eventually it had to happen later. Part of what I'll attribute this to is the issue of the panic that the employers went into. Some employers went into serious cutbacks in terms of the flowers, that is serious pruning. Others went into uprooting of the flowers. And therefore, when you realize that within the month of March, within 2 weeks or thereabout, already orders started coming. And a number of farms who had decided to uproot then had no flowers to export. The number of employers who had flowers to export were also facing challenges with the cargo space. So that became issues of challenges. The other aspects of labor included now the employers had to make arrangements to provide masks, to provide sanitizers, to move these employees in terms of most of the flower farms, as you know, normally provide employees with buses to the workplace. And with the social distancing, that meant you needed to do more trips, which obviously was more expensive. But at least, unlike the other sectors, the government allowed us to still continue with going to the workplace with those arrangements of social distancing. That one was properly managed up to that point in terms of the MOUs, and we were then able to do 3 MOUs up to now, which has quite handled the issues of labor. But then we had the issues of the logistical challenges. I said movement of employees was one. Another one was movement of the flowers from the farms to the airport due to the curfew hours. It was initially a challenge, but then working with the Ministry of Industrialization and Trade, we were able to provide passes for the drivers who were transporting flowers to the airport. Initially, of course, you realize that the government was a bit ruthless when it came to handling of this curfew, the police especially. So the other challenge in terms of logistics was, well, the order started coming up and the market, the buyers were ordering for flowers. Again, we faced the challenge of the cargo space. And again, we were able to sit down with a number of the government ministries concerned and looked at the cargo space, and we appreciate the government was able to help in terms of that in a big way, and movement of flowers to that. The other challenge was the issues of the market. So with the opening up, again, a number of farms had flowers, a number did not have flowers. With the lockdown, there was the issue of the purchasing power of the flower buyers, which obviously had been eroded because they were also not going to the workplaces. A number of farms, and I went around visiting the flower farms, and a number of farms actually were discarding the flowers. So you would find a huge heap of flowers at the workplace, at the flower premises, because most of them were doing about 30%, 20% of the exports. Part of the interventions which the employers were able to do was to sign an MOU with the unions. And part of it, which probably I never mentioned earlier, was to ensure that while the employees were on unpaid leave, a number of them, the NSSF and the NHIF was actually remitted. This we did as an advance payment for to the employee, so that we are able to ensure that their medical insurance does not lapse. Also, NSSF, we were able to make sure that that one was paid. Through the associations, the interventions also, we were able to raise some funds and contribute to the COVID fund, which again, we were asked to indicate we wanted it challenged, and a number of the interventions went into provisions of food and PPEs, especially in areas around Naivasha and in Nanyuki, where the flowers are grown. We were able to support the employees in terms of ensuring that they sanitize. We were also able to train them in terms of keeping that hygiene and sanitization. Working together after the CS Labour visited the flower farms, we were also able to agree on the intervention on their part, on the part of the government, in terms of cash disbursements and stipends for those who had lost employment through work unpaid leave. So this is something that hasn't really come to the employees, but we had been asked to provide the full list, including the telephone numbers, and that something would be sent to them. It's something that we haven't known whether the employees have been sent any cash disbursement as at now, but it's part of the interventions that we were able to do. Part of it also included working from home. A number of the employers had to send employees home to work from home. We also had to come up very fast with the policies and guidelines to guide in the workplace so that the employees are not exposed, because now it touched on the issues of their safety at the workplace. So we were able to come up with that. Those are just but a few of the interventions which have been done by the employers. But in terms of the future of work and the emerging issues that we are looking at, we are looking at rethinking the new workplace safety and health. It's an area where we had not been exposed to the pandemic, and therefore the area of safety and health needs to be relooked at. There is the issue of handling the pandemic, as in terms of legislations. There was the Sakaja bill which came about, but then in the process again disappeared. I think it's now, it calls on the government and the Ministry of Labor to come up with legislations that should guide us for the future if anything comes up. Part of the challenges also that we are seeing as emerging is the issue of the stigmatization of employees who had been affected by this. When you send employees away on unpaid leave and you are now supposed to recall them back to the workplace, there are the issues of the protocols and ensuring that the rejoining the rest of the team, certain protocols are followed. But in the process, this comes up as discrimination or stigmatization at the workplace, and it's posing a challenge, which we may need to look at as stakeholders. Employees also who were sent on unpaid leave. A number of them have not been able to report. Maybe just to report to the team is that we have come to an agreement with the union that since our low season is slowly going away and the better season is coming from the month of September, we are looking at a situation where we are recalling all the employees actually by the 1st of September. So we have signed a memorandum with the union to recall all the employees by 1st of September. And any of the growers who is still struggling with the COVID issues should be able to present to us so that we again have a discussion with the union. So ours is a very consultative approach. The other issues is about when you send employees to work from home, there's the issue of the workplace registration and the exposure that this leads to in terms of safety and the legislations. So it's an area that needs to be looked at. And another area is the continuous monitoring of the effects or the impact of the COVID-19. I think this needs to be done by the key stakeholders. The strategies to remain afloat for the employers, number one is that a number of employees, unfortunately, may have to be declared redundant. So far, I think about 4,600 have actually been declared redundant, but most of the growers, in fact, I have 2 of the growers who have actually had to shut down in the Kajiado area, but then others may just have to do with less employees because the flour uptake is still very low. The other intervention was the issue of the VAT refund. When the president directed the Treasury to release the VAT refund, which was held by the Treasury, this enabled a lot of cushioning in terms of cash flow, and this has helped the industry. The other one was the stimulus packages, which the government had promised to give. These has helped a lot, although the same has not really been released by the government, but it's still in the process. The discussion we have been having, the latest discussion about the survival with the union is the discussion has been about whether at this period we need to be giving a salary increment. We are due to give a salary increment in the month of August. 1st of August, the employees are supposed to be getting a salary increment. We have had a discussion with the union and we have agreed that we probably need to give, but half of what had been negotiated so that these can keep the employees going at the same time, keep the employer afloat until things are resumed and things come back to normal. So we, as employers, we really appreciate the interventions which have been done, especially by the bodies that we work together, Fair Trade, Kenya Human Rights. I think there's been a lot of focus on the employees, which has really helped in terms of the cash disbursements, in terms of the food intervention, in terms of providing food and all that. So that was my last comment about what we have done, in just thanking everybody for what we have been able to do to make the industry sustainable and to survive during this period of the pandemic. Thank you.
You have given us a very good background about your membership, your year of formation, the membership you work with, and how you work with other partners, trade unions, and among others. And of course, the context of COVID, how it caused many challenges in the something most of us, of course, were not anticipating. And part of what you have said is a lack of a legislative framework to deal with that. I don't know whether you did with that. There's a point we lost you because our internet went down due to blackout. Actually, I lost you. I disappeared from the system for close to 10 minutes. I don't know whether you did with that issue of the legislative gap how do we deal with that. You also went into some of the things which were done. You're talking about the MOUs and the provisions which went a long way in helping support to workers and also to the producers. You've talked about the MOUs, and then also the other frameworks which have been put in place by the state, like the VAT refunds, which you have said has gone a long way in cushioning the operations of the farms. It's good also to know like that amounts to how much in total. The stimulus package, which you have said is yet to be disbursed, that is also going to be critical in terms of supporting the farms. And I think what needs to be done to have that released is something you can let us know, and how much is expected in the stimulus package. But what is delaying that disbursement, I think you may also want to update us in that. And that notion of also agreeing with the union to pay up for what was due for increment in August is also quite an interesting intervention, which I'm sure workers will respond to independently. And of course, you have also enabled us to know how many workers at the end of the day have been declared redundant. You're talking about 4,600. Those figures are also very important, because when we are talking about this situation, it's also good to know the qualitative impact of COVID to the flower sector among other industries in the country. Thank you for that, and we hope to see you again independently as we unpackage some of the issues you have raised, some of which require more conversations. So finally, we have Ellen Apio, who is the Deputy Labour Commissioner, Minister of Labour and Social Protection, which is basically the ministry now in charge for formulation of policies and also implementation on matters labor justice. She's going to talk about safeguarding labor rights in the wake of pandemic. What has the government of Kenya done? And I think part of what the government has done has been referenced by Mr. Siele. So I think I'm sure she's going to be building on that and giving us more perspective. And some of the issues I think I've raised about the funds. If she has details, that is something she can also brief us around. So Madam Ellen is the Deputy Labour Commissioner as the Minister of Labour and Social Protection, as I have indicated, is a long-serving officer of the ministry. She has served as a labor officer and worked in field stations and handled labor complaints from both unionized and non-unionized workers involved in labor inspections and the implementation of various support programs. She is currently responsible for international labor affairs, where she continues to shape development of labor rights standards through influencing standards at regional and national spaces. She's also responsible for training of staff, workers, and employers, policy formulation, review and implementation, as well as resolution of labor disputes. She continues to play an instrumental role in advancing social dialogue by liaising with social partners among other arms of government and relevant entities in the labor justice sector. So karibu sana, Ellen, you give us your perspectives as you also try to also deal with some of the issues we have raised after Siele spoke. Karibu sana. Ellen Apio, are you in the room?
It looks like we have lost connection from Helen.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, I switched to reconnect. Can I ask?
Davis?
Hello?
Davis?
Yes.
Hello, Davis.
Yes, Mary.
Yeah, Helen is on. I'm trying to get the host I'm trying to get the host Bernard to support Helen because she has joined in with a different from a different machine, and her name reads Labor. So if we could promote the Labor person as panelist for her to be able to speak. So I don't know whether Bernard can hear me. Hello.
Bernard.
Hi, Bernard. Helen has.
Yes, she has joined.
Please promote her, please. Okay. David?
Yes.
She has been promoted. You can invite her.
She's on now?
Get her to speak.
Okay, she's on. Okay, Sawa.
Yes.
Helen?
Hello. She has been promoted. Are you able to see her? She has been promoted as panelist.
Okay.
So I'm trying to get her. Helen, you've been promoted as panelist. Are you able to speak? Hello.
I can see a name, a profile by the name Leba.
Do you want to log in again? Okay. So Davis.
Yes.
Helen is trying to log out and log in again. In the meantime, we could ask Andrew to weigh in on the question I had posed before Helen comes in. I had asked Andrew how a building back better scenario would look like, as envisioned by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Thank you, Mary. So I would ask Andrew to come in to respond to that, and also Ciele to also come back and also give us more details about the figures which he was talking about, the amounts disbursed by the government, for example, the VAT refunds, and also the stimulus package, which they are expecting from the government. How much is that, and what is delaying the disbursement of the same? And to Mr. Mugai, around the living wage pilot, where is that taking place? So first we can deal with that as wait for Ellen to come over. We start with Andrew. Andrew Data, are you on board? Andrew?
Davis,
Davis,
maybe I can handle.
yeah, you could invite Ciele to go first.
Okay. Ciele,
Yes, Davis.
yeah, welcome back to just speak to those few financial questions I've raised in terms of graduate figures.
So sorry that you lost me at some point. I actually didn't realize that the network was poor at one point. But what I wanted to raise is that the assistance that we have received from the government is mainly to ensure that there is cash flow within. So when the president gave his first the presidential speech on COVID-19, he directed the Treasury that we needed to have the VAT refund. This is money which was held by government but belongs to the industry. And the total amount which is owed to the industry is actually 12 billion. This was not released. He directed that within 3 weeks. He wanted that amount released, but I think the government's bureaucracy is really deeper. So that was released. They released about 7 billion. That was after 3 months. That was in June. And that really helped the industry in terms of cash flow because a number of them were facing cash flow issues. And that was the reason why they were then able to carry on. And then I think in the third presidential speech on the issues of COVID, he again came up with stimulus packages for the various industries. And part of it was that there'll be about 3 billion that will be released to the horticulture agricultural sector, and that will help to cushion the industry. Part of it, of course, was to go into the hotel industry, hospitality, the conservancies, and all this. But then, obviously, again, because of bureaucracy, it's not a number. I think all our members have not been able to access that fund to be able to rebuild from there. You know, a number of the people who are facing issues of cash flow are unable to have the inputs, fertilizer and all this, which are actually required. So one would have to inject in a bit of more funds to be able to then start again and carry on with that. So we are hoping that this will be done. The other issue that you had asked was about our discussions with the labor. No, not with the labor, but with the union. We have had that discussion with the union. We had a CBA which was in place, implementation on the second phase, but then we have come to an agreement with that we actually implement. So end of this month, despite the challenges, we still realize that the purchasing power of these employees is obviously eroded and they still need to be cushioned, and we have agreed on giving them a small increase just to cushion them for this period. So I think those were areas which you want clarified, and I'm sure we'll still discuss more in the plenary. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ciele. Is Andrew back? Andrew Odete, are you back?
I think he's not back.
Oh, he's not back. What about Ellen Apio?
Helen is still trying to rejoin the call. Oh yeah, so there's a text that says enable Malaki for Helen.
Okay.
So this, yeah. So Bernard, if you could support with that, enable Malachi for Helen. There's someone joining by the name Malachi. Allow him to join. That's where Helen is joining from. Bernard, can you see that?
Yes, Malachi, you can proceed and unmute your mic.
Malachi, can you hear us? Yes, great. Davis, I think we have Malachi now, and that is Helen proceeding from that platform.
Okay.
You
Thank you.
You can
Yes.
go ahead, Davis. You can go ahead, Davis. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen, and apologies for the technical challenges you have experienced, but now we are good to go. So we are inviting you to speak about regarding lab rights in the wake of epidemic. What has the government done? The government of Kenya done? And I was saying part of that has been covered by Wesley in terms of the financial support from Treasury. So I'm sure you are going to be giving us more perspectives. So please welcome and proceed from there. Helen?
Helen, you can proceed. What could be the problem?
Bernard, can you check for us again?
Yeah, Malachi is unmuted. There seems to be a technical challenges from her side with the sound, specifically with the sound. Yeah.
Okay. Helen, if you could speak. I think some sound was coming through at some point.
Yes, Helen, we can hear you, but it seems that you're quite far from your microphone. So you might need to.
It's a bit of challenge that I have here, but as soon as
We can hear you now, but very faintly. If you could just come closer, at least I had some sound. Are you able to just come a bit closer to the mic? Able to hear something like it's a bit of a challenge. So the sound is coming on.
Hello, Ellen, we can't hear you.
Oh, I think there's quite a challenge on her end, David.
Yeah.
Davis, can you hear me?
Yes.
It looks like we are really having a challenge with the network for Helen.
Yeah.
Particularly her sound.
Bernard,
So,
what options do we have, Bernard?
It's technical challenges from her side. So Yeah, maybe she can use, if Helen, if you can hear me, you can try use a different microphone.
There is a challenge.
Bernard,
Yes, Davis.
But he's trying to rejoin. Maybe in the meantime, we could take questions. Davis?
yeah. I'm also wondering if there's an option of calling her directly.
Davis?
Yes, I'm wondering if we have an option of calling her directly and putting her on speaker, because it's good to hear the perspectives of the government on this. You can, Bernard can advise on that. So I think we can proceed to plenary as we wait for Ellen to rejoin.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, Davis.
What is Ellen saying? I've seen a message somewhere.
I think we just
Davis,
proceed.
if we could proceed to plenary, please.
Okay, so we now welcome questions, comments, and input from members in the plenary. I think for that, we'll have like 20 minutes maximum. Hello, we are currently open for questions and comments from members.
I note that we have a few questions on the Q&A. One from Feristas. The question is, thank you for the good presentation to other presenters. Is quality, affordable health care accessible to everyone as a right without discrimination? That's one of the questions on the Q&A. And then there's also another question from Dorothy Minyiri. She's asking, kindly, what method of criteria are you using to distribute the relief funds to the flower organizations? And then lastly, we have a question on the Q&A from ACES Communications ESLNet, and the question is, thank you, Marian Davis, and other rich presentations. This is Mona from ESLNet, and the question is addressed to Andrew, as well as in Andrew Gonzaga and others, as well as in relation to the draft legally binding instruments to regulate corporate activity that is in the process of being negotiated under the UN Human Rights Council in an effort to move us towards ending corporate impunity. The most recent draft was published on August 7th, and we now need to ensure the meaningful participation of states and civil society.
Bernard? Bernard?
Yes, Mary.
Helen has rejoined the call as Helen Apio. If we could unmute her, she'll be able to speak at least for a few minutes, even if 5 minutes, because she has been making attempts to rejoin. So if you look for Helen Apio on the list of participants, you could just kindly unmute her. She's in the call as Helen Apio. Is she unmuted now? Is she unmuted?
Helen, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Not started the video.
Helen?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I want to apologize for the mishap we've had. Unfortunately, it's eaten into your time. And I am profusely sorry for the inconvenience I've caused this particular forum, but it was not intended. It is a technology challenge, and I have the entire team here with me. Chair Malombe, I hope you'll excuse me. I want you to see all of them, so
Yeah.
that
Please proceed.
the future of work, you can see
Wow.
what it means. I
You
have
can
the
see.
team here. So
Yeah.
I want to appreciate you and thank the gentleman. In terms of our discussion, I have followed keenly the discussion, and I want to appreciate the presentation by my fellow panelists for a very articulate and insightful in terms of contributions to this particular discourse. And I want to really commend the Kenya Human Rights Commission for having made this possible. And I say this with sincerity and also based on the duty of government, and which we are talking about the Ministry of Labor in terms of its mandate, in terms of protection, promotion, respect, and remedy for human rights, and which labor rights are part of it. Now, I will not bore you going into locating this discussion within the international standards, the framework that we have, or having it locally, because I think that has been articulated quite competently by my colleagues, and I want to thank them for that. Talking about decent work and the issue of COVID-19, I think it goes without any contestation that the state has a duty, and the Kenyan government has made all effort to try to protect the rights of labor within this particular period of the pandemic. And I think I will maybe just highlight one or two things that have been done, because my colleagues have amply discussed this. If you look at the national level, this has been led by His Excellency the President, and when he declared the pandemic, and by setting up a national emergency response committee, which then cascading down, we have a sectoral committee that was formed by the Cabinet Secretary, Chelugui. And this committee also is supported by several other committees that looks at labor relations, looks at occupational safety and health, but also looks at the issue of migration. Now, those committees have done a great deal of work, and which work has been done with concerted effort, engagement of the social partners, employers and workers, and also other groups that have had the interest to try and influence the process from the national level. And having said that, I think we are all alive to the fact that there was an economic stimulus package, but also in terms of the workplace challenges that Mr. Siele has ably highlighted in terms of contractual obligations, in terms of issues of organizing, the issues of representation. The tripartite was able to come up with a memorandum of understanding, which gave a global or a national framework, but then also with the room, giving the necessary latitude for sectoral engagement. And I want to commend this particular sector of floriculture and horticulture for having engaged quite vigorously. They've come up with successive memoranda, and which is alive to the fact that the situations change and the plane in terms of the sector varies from one place to another. And the details of that, I think, can be shared by the actual parties. Now, what then remains is the issue of how do we deal with it going forward? We have the pandemic today, a pandemic which we know as COVID-19, but we could also have other crises in future, which then we may need to address and may affect workers in this particular sector. Now, that has triggered the interest of government and social partners, and the government is initiating a process in terms of review. We are beginning to look at it again because we realized we didn't have what you'd call not comprehensive, but one that anticipated crisis situations such as this. So we need to look at it. We can look at it sectorally, and through the Agricultural Wages Council and several other sectors, there's that opportunity. And I think that has already been put into motion. Then there's the issue of the Decent Work Country Program. The Decent Work Country Program really comes in to mitigate the deficiencies that exist within the world of work. And that can be, we can look at that from different corners of the prism. We can look at it from a futuristic point of view, but we could also look at it at this particular point. So when you look at the element of promotion of employment, how do we ensure that we cushion everybody, even as we move into the new dispensation, the introduction of machinery and equipment? How do we protect those who we have ordinarily covered under this particular social security, social protection schemes of social assistance, social insurance, those who we've already covered? What about the newly vulnerable lots? What about those who are threatened and may fall into the new category? So how do we look at that? That can be mitigated through that particular Decent Work Country Program, which is under development. And we look forward to engaging all actors and players, reskilling, retooling of business as well. Then we are talking about alternative dispute resolution as a key element to try and balance the interest of both parties and minimize the issue of conflict. That is another area we are looking at. All said and done, all this we believe can be achieved by sustaining social dialogue and using fora such as this one, not in the traditional sense, but looking at the tripartite class, going beyond employers and workers, but also involving other actors who come in the same spirit of trying to maintain industrial peace, but also sustain livelihoods, but also and as well as sustaining business. So I think in brief, Chair, I would want to stop there. I know it's very rash, but you'll understand the time and the anxiety I've suffered for about 15 minutes trying to get back on board. So with that, I want to rest my submission. I submit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ellen, for that submission, which has basically taken us through what the state has done. Of course, the commitment and the obligation to protect the rights of workers, the presidential directives, of course, and what came with it, and the sectoral initiatives which were guided by the minister, and some of the things you'll be thinking about moving forward, because I think this is part of what we need to look at in terms of what level of innovations and preparedness do we need to put in place in the context of emergencies? And that's why you're talking about the Decent Work Country program. And the very good idea about the tripartite plus, which is going to be strategic in terms of opening and expanding the conversations to the partners who you have indicated very clearly are critical in enhancing industrial peace and also livelihood of the workers, and of course the interest of the economy and the country at large. So thank you for that. And before you came in, there were also a number of questions which had been raised by our common writers, which were going to go to a number of panelists. There was the question, and these are the issues which are emerging in the online question and answer session. The issue of how do we ensure quality healthcare in this context for workers. Madam Ellen, you can look at that, and also Wesley can weigh in. There was a question of the criteria for applying and utilizing the relief funds to the flower farms, and I think this was based on the presentation by Mr. Mungai from Fairtrade. And there was also a question from ESRNet to Antro, which is very long, and I'm sure he has looked at that. He needs to also respond to that. And finally, to Madam Ellen, you have talked about, you also deal with migrations. I don't know, what does this entail? And as you come on board, I think you keep us in this tripartite plus arrangement moving forward. We want to be part of that. So I would welcome the panelists to respond to those. And then from there, we will guide you on how to process additional questions.
Hello. Chair?
Hello, I can respond to the relief fund application question. The relief fund was designed and accessible to fair traders, certified producers. We did create selection criteria where we were looking at most vulnerable producers. However, producers made direct applications into the fund. Obviously, the needs of the farms outweighed the size of the relief fund, and we were not able to respond to their full set of requests. We were giving approximately, I think, $5,000 to most of the farms, and this was only responding to a few of their needs. However, I think we are getting more interests from development partners to continue supporting relief aid in the farms, in the producer organizations, particularly touching on workers. And therefore, we are still scaling up this relief fund as we get more support from development partners and market actors as well, supply chain actors. I think in terms of use, the fund was actually the decision as to how the funds were utilized were taken by the worker committees, who were able to look at who are their most vulnerable members and what are their most immediate needs in respect to safety and the relief needs. So that decision was taken by the farms or the workers themselves. Yeah.
From there, we proceed to Mr. Siele. I have seen there's additional question to you regarding the question is the recall of workers applicable to temporary workers? And there was another one regarding what does working from home mean to flower farm workers, because that was one of the major mantras of the directives which the country received when we got into the pandemic. Ciele?
Yeah, thank you, Davis. The two questions. The one, let me start with the last one on working from home. The issue of working from home Sorry. Yeah, the working from home involved the employees who mainly did the office work and those who process the procurement. So it's mainly the clerical jobs which did not require the employee to be present at the workplace. So these employees were provided with, were facilitated. They go with their computers home and then they are able to work and give the reports from home. So that is what it meant. But then the majority of the others did not had to work from the workplace. Now, the agreement that we have with the union about the resumption of work with effect from 1st of September only touches on the permanent employees. The seasonal employees will be picked as the season picks also. If you realize, Davis, we currently are on a low season. So the employers may not be able to utilize the seasonal employees at the moment, but I'm sure by the month of October, when the season has picked, a number of these people will still be hired to go back to the workplace and assist in terms of that. So, so far we haven't received any concern from any of the employers regarding our agreement on 1st of September. So it appears almost every employer will be able to recall everybody who was on unpaid leave by 1st of September. Everybody will be back to work. Thank you.
Thank you. There's just indulge me a bit. There's another emerging question on which formula do you use to determine who are going to be subjected to unpaid leave?
Oh, sure. The formula we subjected those who are going on unpaid leave. You know, this is something that we almost passed now because we have come out of that on the issue of the unpaid leave. The first one was we released those employees who were on temporary contractual agreements. These were the term contracts, who we mainly call in our CBA the seasonal employees. Those ones were the first ones to go. And then the second was we were going on some kind of a formula where we keep as a priority those who are on essential services. It's mainly security, those who do irrigation, those who do the feeding. Those were the ones we retained. But the people whose work was no longer there, take for example, the people in the grading hall. These are the people who process the final product, and there's no final product to be processed, then we release them. But then the ones who work in the farm, on the greenhouses, these ones, a number of them were still kept to sustain the crop until the market was able to be opened again. So I would say that was mainly the criteria, Davis. Yes, that was mainly the criteria, and that's what we did. Thank you, Davis.
Thank you. We can have Andrew now speaking to the first question, which was raised by Mary about bouncing back. And then there's the other question about which was raised by Isaranet. Andrew.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm back. Yeah, sorry, I went off air. I've been trying to reconnect. Yeah. The bouncing back question, I didn't get that. Must have been when I was trying to fight with technology. But I've gotten the two questions. The one about the binding treaty and the one about quality and affordable healthcare, whether it's achievable. Could I start with those? Or Mary could...
Sure.
Okay. So quality and affordable healthcare, is it something that can be achievable in terms of human rights without discrimination. This is the whole objective of the universal health coverage that many governments across the world are trying to put in place at the moment. Of course, the problem has been that some people are better able to realize their right to healthcare and emergency medical treatment compared with others, mainly owing to economic positions and other elements of discrimination across society. So the universal, I think our business in this is to analyze the universal healthcare proposition and try to ensure that the human rights imperatives, including the protection from discrimination and the assertion of equality, is underpinned in this coverage. At the moment, of course, it seeks to ensure access, broad access, and also deepening the quality of the coverage that is under the UHC. So it seeks to provide basic healthcare for everybody in the society, which does not mean that public healthcare provision will automatically be as good as private healthcare provision, but it would mean that government undertakes its obligation of financing public healthcare in terms of infrastructure, training, and equipping the healthcare sector, and ensuring that there's coverage in terms of insurance for the general population. In that way, then basic healthcare would have been achieved across the board. But it's our duty to interrogate the policies on universal healthcare care. There was a question which I've read from Mona about the binding treaty and what we can do as Kenya to ensure that we are in this conversation. Maybe a bit of a background. There are two processes that have been ongoing on. The binding treaty, which seeks to establish a binding treaty on business and human rights, which has been with the Intergovernmental Working Group at the UN level. There was a gridlock on this because many states said they do not want a binding treaty. Why don't we just go with the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights? So the UNGPs is the other process where it sets the guidelines which states can use to develop their own action plans and later legislation. So for the binding treaty, earlier this month, the working group rendered its second iteration of the draft. One had been rendered, I think, in 2018, which basically now is upon governments and other non-state actors to contribute to, so that they can come up with a final version of the binding treaty to take before the states parties for adoption as a binding treaty that is enforceable across the globe on business and human rights. What can we do to ensure that we input into this process? Ordinarily, the state process would be led by the Department of Justice. Of course, the Ministry of Labor present here would have a key role in contributing to this. The other actor who is an anchor for this kind of process is the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. But going by experience on issues of business and human rights, which the government keeps in the back burner, it would behoove the civil society organization to organize themselves to ensure that they're able to have their own consultations and make presentations at country level when that process by government catches up with us. So I would urge that civil society organizes itself, even as we impress upon the National Commission and the Department of Justice to lead some of these processes. But concurrently is another process that's going on with the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights. The UNGPs are turning 10 years. And at that point, the working group, the UN working group that has been shepherding the UN guiding principles, is trying to see how they can improve the structure and probably even the content of the UNGPs. It's an invitation to society to come up and look at what has worked, what is working, what hasn't worked, and what is context specific, especially for this region on as regards the UNGPs. So in the coming months, you'll be hearing, mainly shepherded by the OHCHR and the UNDP, leading the process of continental consultations and mainly organized at country level to begin with. How can we then also get onto that platform and ensure that our views on the UNGPs are taken on board when the UN working group is sitting next year to take stock of the written submissions that have been developed? So those are two processes that we must be aware of. If I may get a brief on the Building Back Better question.
Mary, can you reframe that again for Andrew to converse?
Thank you, Andrew, for coming back to the conversation, and our apologies for the hitches that you and Madam Helen have suffered, but we are happy that you have braved the technical hitches and come back to the conversation. My question is actually hinged on the recent speech by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle, where she called upon businesses to build back better. So I was asking, in your own view, how would a building back better scenario look like? What would portend in a building back better kind of trajectory? Thank you.
When we look at business and human rights, the first responsibility, the primary responsibility is with government, followed by businesses, and then the rest of society follows. So my sense would be, and as has been through different frameworks, whether the SDGs, whether the Building Back Better initiative, or whether other business and human rights structures, governments are being urged to shift their resources towards what you would call critical areas of sustainable development. And this include provision of universal healthcare, for instance, Medicare, including insurance, social protection, enlarging the social protection floors and deepening the coverage, pensions, affordable education, addressing issues to do with vulnerable persons, providing them support, whether financially or through other means. So governments are required to develop laws and policies that address this. Invariably, some of these laws will amount to human rights laws, and those are some of the opportunities we should be looking at. In terms of the world of work, what does this look like? For instance, if you look at the area of vulnerable persons, especially those who are vulnerable to pandemics and eventualities, you'd look at issues to do with non-discrimination. You'd look at issues to do with securing a wage that is sustainable across value chains, but that is also livable for the workers to enable their resilience. You look at laws and policies that sustain job security, even in terms of pandemics such as this. And broadly, even outside the context of the laws, you'd look at value chain arrangements. If you look at the business elements, what are they being asked to do? Value chain arrangements to ensure that there is, say, insurance for businesses so that they are able to withstand calamities such as have befallen us at the moment, that they're able to sustain those who rely on those value chains, including workers, including on the businesses themselves. So these are discussions that should be had on different levels. Value chain level discussions, which include cross-governmental engagements and cross-value chain engagements, and the national level discussions to ensure that laws and policies are there to stream finances towards where they are needed most, to ensure that there is that kind of adaptability and resilience in this community.
Are you done, Andrew? Okay. Thank you, Andrew, for that very conclusive presentation. You have managed to clarify also a lot of technical conversation there. So at this point, I want to invite Madam Ellen Opiyo to deal with one question first and foremost, which has been raised twice in the platform regarding the position of Kenya in the ratification of the ILO Convention 190, which is about ending violence, sexual violence, and harassment. And of course, Andrew has also brought the question of National Action Plan with respect to UN guided principles on peace and human rights, which is generally guided by the Department of Justice. To what extent is your ministry involved in this, and how do we also push this forward, because it has also taken time? Although Mary says it's going to be Kenya is going to be one of the first countries, is going to be the first country in Africa actually to adopt this, and also give another perspective regarding moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Chairman, for giving me this chance again to respond to some of those questions. I think the last question, you talked about a national framework that is being developed. I didn't.
The National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. Hello? Hello?
That because those are challenges in communication. Please, where is that? Effort by the Department of Justice. This is tiring.
Ellen, we can hear you. Can you proceed?
You can hear me now. Okay. Okay. I want to believe we'll work together with Department of Justice, as we've always done. And now that you've brought it up, I think I'll follow up that keenly. And I want to say, in terms of development of the Decent Work Country program, we are at the nascent stage. We are developing the third generation, which is should run for 3 years, 2020 to 2023. And we're yet to get the go-ahead from the International Labour Organization, which is the lead agency in supporting this particular effort. But other agencies also work together with the ILO and the UNDAF in supporting this particular program. And like I said, we're addressing 4 areas: the area of promotion of employment, promotion of social dialogue, labor relations, and social protection. So that gives enough room for everybody to participate. And once the approval is done, we shall be engaging beyond the tripartite, like I said. So we still have a chance to engage every interested party. On the question on migration, there's a study ongoing, and that can be shared with the Commission for follow-up, as well the addressing the issue of impact on labor migration, COVID on labor migration. Lastly, on the question of Convention number 190, at what stage is Kenya? Kenya remains very supportive towards the fight against sexual harassment, and did vote for adoption of this particular standard last year, and will be engaging all actors. We've already started discussion with different agencies who have approached us, and once we have we're able to engage these at the National Labour Board, then we'll be able to roll out in terms of working out strategies and means of exploring ratification of that particular standard. As it is, the standard is still very new. It's not in force. It will be in force after 12 months of its of ratification by the second country. This has already been ratified by 2 countries, was ratified at the point of adoption. So we anticipate maybe after actually 12 months have passed now, we should be considering that particular issue alongside other countries. I think that's what I can respond. That is my response for now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much for that. And we look forward to also having further engagement with you on this. It is one of the issues which is critical, and which the civil society in the labor movement broadly has been advancing. So
certainly,
this is something. Hello?
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. So we'll be seeking further engagement with your good office around this. We look forward also to receiving the report on migration in the context of labor and COVID, and also to let you know also with in partnership with the Department of Migration within Interior, we have been working on broad migration policy. So this is also something we can also canvass with your good office. And then finally, the aspect of National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights is also something we can also have further discussion with your good office as you engage the Department of Justice. So those are critical policy areas which we can explore further engagement with you and our sector members. And just to let you know, next week on Friday, we are purposing to also launch the report we have done on monitoring the human rights impact of COVID, and part of it is going to be advancing also this aspect of labor rights and the COVID, but it is now looking at the broader human rights and governance frameworks with respect to COVID. But labor is part of that, and we may look for you again next week for a bigger space where we'll be dealing with all the issues now around COVID and governance in the country. At this point, I want to thank all the panelists for their great presentations, which have been quite informative. We have gotten so much information, clarification on so many things. We have also gotten a lot of data and statistics on some of the issues we have been working on with respect to COVID. And without much ado, it's my pleasure to invite Comrade Sena Chambari, who is one of our labor rights monitors and partners, to give us the closing remarks. Sena?
Yes. Thank you, Davis, Mary, and Tim. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah. We can hear you, Sena, loud and clear.
Thank you so much. I want first to send my apologies just in case you lose me at some point. I'm on transit. I had an engagement at 5, so I left home while still in the meeting. So I'm on my way to taxi. I want to say on my behalf and very grateful to the panelists who have shared a lot with us. You made our issues and some of the issues However, yes, please.
The connection is extremely poor. I think because of the movements of the vehicle,
yes.
it's extremely poor. Yeah, I'm afraid we are not able to hear you. I don't know whether you're able to maybe pull over to the side for a few minutes, because we are closing the session in about 3 minutes. Otherwise, the signal is quite poor because of the movement. Davis, I think I could just do the closing so that we allow the participants to also rest. It's been a long meeting, and we've had very good participation, including very high levels of patience amidst a very turbulent technical terrain. So if you allow, I will just close the meeting, and I thank all the participants very, very much. You were on time and you have remained on until this time, when we have exceeded the limit of the meeting by over 1 hour. We thank you very, very much for your patience, for the engagement through the chat box. We have been able to take some of your questions, and for those that we have not been able to respond to, please feel free to write to us, and we shall forward the questions either to the respective speakers, or we shall respond directly. So feel free to keep this conversation going. We thank you very, very much for your patience and your participation. Allow me also to thank the speakers, and I want to single out all of them. I want to thank Andrew Odete. Thank you very much for a very insightful presentation. We appreciate and we hope that we can have this conversation another day to basically conclude on areas that may have been left out, because this was extremely insightful and we could not have done everything in under 15 or 20 minutes. So I'm doing the appreciation in no particular order, so kindly allow. I want to also thank Madam Helena Pio, the Deputy Labour Commissioner. She had a really turbulent time connecting, but she stayed on and soldiered on through the turbulence and stayed on to the end of the conversation. Thank you for weighing in very heavily, for illuminating on what the government is doing, and presenting opportunities for collaboration with your good office. And I have personally worked with you previously, and I will be looking out for these available opportunities to see whether we can scale up the work and the conversation. We thank you very much, Helen, for the patience and for remaining on. Thank you also, Bwana Wesley Siele, the CEO of Agricultural Employers Association. Bwana Siele epitomizes, reach. When this sector is sometimes extremely difficult to penetrate, Mr. Siele has been extremely reachable and extremely open door policy. We thank you for always opening your doors and for being always willing to engage in these conversations, because you make it possible for us to partner and to understand what you're going through and to see where we can weigh in as partners who are pursuing a common goal. Allow me also to thank Henry Wera, who is not in the call right now, the HIVO's regional program officer, who also illuminated a very insightful presentation on the findings and recommendations of an impact assessment that HIVO's has commissioned, a very fresh study because it was commissioned in April, May, around that time. So we thank him for the support, the partnership, and the collaboration. I also thank Gonzaga Mungai of Fairtrade, the flowers manager. I reached to him within extremely short notice, but he was extremely open to having this conversation. He did not require notice for me to come back. So thank you very much, Gonzaga. I normally try to pronounce that name with a lot of caution because where I come from, it can be a very difficult name to pronounce. It has all the syllables that pose difficulties for us. So we appreciate your presentation. We now know what Fairtrade has done and the opportunities therein. And I believe this is also really the beginning of collaboration between the Kenya Human Rights Commission and your good office and the Fairtrade, and we shall escalate this conversation from here. I also want to thank the flower farm workers who were meant to speak in this call, but who really were blocked by technology. And these are the realities that we have to contend with. Sometimes we have to all think about, you know, if we talk about allowing a voice for everybody, it means really thinking about these kind of challenges. So we tried to make it possible for Justirian and Faith Iminza and the other workers to participate. Unfortunately, technology got the better of the meeting, and we are where we are. But I thank them very much for the resilience, for weathering a very deep storm during the COVID period, for staying strong and resilient, and now bouncing back. We are happy that 80% have gone back, and we hear from Mr. Wesley that the sector is slowly absorbing everybody. So really, we appreciate all the speakers. We appreciate the participants. I also want to specially thank my co-moderator, Davis Malombe. Tabari, your mic is on. Yes, I was saying that I'm also thanking my co-moderator, Davis Malombe, the Deputy Executive Director at the Kenya Human Rights Commission, for co-moderating the session with me, and of course for the support in putting this together. I thank my colleagues, Bernard, who was behind this technology and all the support, and all the other colleagues that are not here and played a role in one way or the other.
Thank you very much.
So asanteni sana. And if Sena, you could mute your mic. Yes. So I thank you all, and I wish you a pleasant evening as you go back home, as you battle the traffic of the evening. We wish you very well, and this conversation certainly has not ended. It has merely begun. We will keep it going. Asanteni sana, keep safe, keep sanitizing, and see you next time.